Before beginning, if you have ever come into contact with a social media profile under the name Anthony_Shots using this person's image and likeness, please contact the Indiana State Police or the FBI. Links to contact both are in the description box down below. This is one of the profiles under the name, and here are just a few photos that this person, who went by the name of Anthony, would use. This information is vitally important to the case we are going to be talking about today, and if you have ever spoken to this man on Instagram, Snapchat, or any other social media, you might have the key to getting justice for Libby and Abby. Contacting the authorities might seem daunting and scary, but if you have any information or spoke to this account in 2017, you could help get justice for these two girls. If you are unsure, or if this person looks familiar to you, I would implore you to check to make sure if you have ever come into contact with Anthony_Shots now, before we start the video. Normally, the content I create here can be consumed passively, but that is not the case now. Please take the time today to check. Libby and Abby are relying on you. Thank you. In 2010, the documentary film Catfish was released. The film followed a young man who had been having an online love affair with what he believed to be the woman of his dreams. Nev, the man featured in the documentary, fell in love with an outstandingly beautiful woman over the internet, and through the coaxing of his brother, the documentarian, they attempt to track the woman down so she and Nev can start their relationship. However, it doesn't take long for things to go wrong, and for the brothers to realize that Megan, the woman that Nev believed he was talking to romantically and planning his life around, was really Angela, a 39-year-old married mother of two severely mentally disabled children. For Angela, pretending to be a young singer, photographer, artist, and have social media accounts as various different people was viewed as an escape. She wanted a bit of freedom from her life and a break from being a stay-at-home parent, and she utilized social media to do it. The documentary brought to light a common practice in the age of the internet, catfishing, which is the act of presenting yourself as someone else online. As social media has become more and more normalized, the act of catfishing others has become so common that many casually describe making fake accounts to check if their spouse is cheating or just to make money. However, in most cases, like the one we are covering today, catfishing can be incredibly dangerous. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. We are going to be covering the case of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, a currently unsolved case that has had major breakthroughs in the last couple of years. This is a case that has been covered by a plethora of other creators. However, given the new information that has come out in the recent months, as well as the victim's family asking for more media attention, I felt that it was pertinent to discuss this case and bring it to a new audience, with the hopes that this will lead to both girls getting justice. And I will be donating a portion of the sponsorship to the Libby and Abby Park Foundation Fund, which funds the development and maintenance of new or existing parks and softball facilities and programs in Delphi, Indiana. Similarly, I will leave a link to donate to the fund in the description down below, if anyone is interested in donating as well. But now, let us begin. In older, true crime documentaries and shows, there is a tried and true cliche about small town living, and how a senseless act of violence tore the entire town apart. In modern coverage, many critics of true crime reporting have gone on to say that those cliches are tired and patently untrue, as murders can happen anywhere, and the idea of an entire town being affected is ridiculous. But that criticism couldn't be further from the truth, especially in today's story. Delphi, Indiana was and still is an incredibly small and tight-knit community, with the population estimated to be less than 4,000 total residents in 2018. According to their currently active website, there was just enough to get by and get by happily. Everyone knew everyone else to some degree, and because of that, there was a deep sense of trust throughout the community. If something was amiss, everyone knew about it within a day or less. The community was incredibly peaceful, as the majority of the surrounding area was farmland and fields. Many men and women actively chose to move to Delphi from larger cities in order to raise their families, and the area was seen as inherently safer. Kids were allowed to run around freely, explore without abandon, and doors were almost never locked. with only one high school in the area that had less than 100 students in each class. Knowing each other and being surrounded by nothing but lush farmlands, the residents felt as if Delphi was the safest place to grow up and grow old. Two residents of the tiny town were 14-year-old Liberty German and 13-year-old Abigail Williams. Liberty went by the name Libby, and Abigail preferred to be called Abby, and the pair were best friends. They did almost everything together, from sports to band to photography and painting. They found that they were the perfect pair. Libby was the more outgoing of the two. If Abby wanted something or wanted to say something, Libby would often speak for her, choosing to lend her voice to her much shyer friend. But that kind of support wasn't something that she only gave to her friend, as many in her class knew her to be exceptionally kind and caring to everyone she came across. She was also an amazing baker and loved making cookies for her friends and family. Her grandmother recalled that nearly every day after school, Libby would come home and make a batch of chocolate chip cookies for the family before starting homework, and how much joy she brought to the family for doing so. Libby was curious and constantly wanted to figure things out. At just 14 years old, she had taken some science courses at Purdue University, and near weekly would change her mind about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Sometimes she would say she wanted to be a baker or a photographer, while other times she would state that she wanted to be a middle school teacher or a crime scene investigator. Her boundless curiosity and joy was something that affected all who knew her, and many knew that once she found what she wanted to do, nothing would stop her from achieving her goals. Though Abby was the shyer of the two girls, she was just as curious and good-natured as her best friend. She loved music and photography, taking photos of nearly everything she could in order to impress her mother, who was also a photographer. She also enjoyed making things for the less fortunate and in need, and often spent time knitting hats for newborns in the area. She was incredibly thoughtful, and like her best friend, would give meaningful gifts to others that would make their lives easier, or just to let them know how much she truly cared. The girls' personalities perfectly complemented each other, and they were inseparable. So inseparable that when they had a Monday off from school in the beginning of 2017, it was a given that Abby would stay the night at Libby's house so they could spend their day off together. On February 12th, the girls spent their night painting in Libby's room, hanging out with her family watching movies and goofing off. They didn't have any set plans on what the next day held, but they hoped, somewhat tentatively, they could spend the day outside, exploring and hanging out with Liberty's older sister, Kelsey. Unfortunately, that would not come to pass. The next morning, the girls woke up around 10 a.m., and Libby's father made the girls pancakes for breakfast. They helped Libby's grandmother with some filing she needed to get done for work, and started to plan their day. The early February morning was unseasonably warm, and they wanted to make the best out of it. They eventually settled on going to the Monon High Bridge Trail, which is one of the most beautiful, lush places in Delphi. The trail has access to the Monon High Trail Bridge, which is an extremely old train track. The bridge itself is incredibly unsafe due to the age and lack of railing, and there are signs surrounding it stating that people should not walk across the bridge. However, those signs are regularly ignored by residents who find the bridge to be incredibly beautiful and a wonderful backdrop to photos. When the girls were discussing their plans, they initially wanted to include Libby's older sister, Kelsey, who has become one of the biggest victims advocates in the true crime space. They excitedly asked her if she would be interested in coming with them and taking pictures at the bridge. However, she had already made other plans with her boyfriend and had to work shortly thereafter. She told the girls she would be willing to drive them to the trail should someone pick them up afterwards. After speaking with their father, he agreed that he would pick the girls up at 3:30, and the girls excitedly told Kelsey. Kelsey brought the girls to the trail, made sure both had sweatshirts in case it got cold later, and told Libby she loved her before leaving at 1:30. Shortly after, at 2:07, Libby posted this picture of Abby onto her Snapchat, showing the 13-year-old girl walking across the bridge. She also saved this video on Snapchat of a man with his head down, walking towards the girls on the bridge. What happened after that, we do not know for sure. The girls were only supposed to be hanging out on the trail for a total of 2 hours, but when Libby's father arrived to pick them up, neither materialized. He waited calmly in his car for a short while, thinking that the girls just got carried away with their photo shoot. and that they were just having fun. But as time went on, and Libby didn't answer any of his calls, he began to get worried. He went out by himself on the trail. While looking for the girls, he ran into a man wearing a flannel shirt. He asked the man if he had seen Libby or Abby in the area, to which the man said no, but he had seen people down by the creek some ways. Libby's father checked where the man directed, but found no sign of the girls. Realizing something must have been wrong for the girls to be gone for so long, he called his mother, Libby's grandmother, and asked if she had heard from the girls or picked them up earlier. She informed him she hadn't. She immediately raised alarm bells and encouraged him to walk the trail himself while she contacted their relatives to get more people to help in the search. She then called Kelsey, who was at work, and told her what was going on. According to Kelsey, she immediately knew that something must be very wrong, as her grandmother never called her multiple times unless it was urgent, and knew not to call during work hours. She immediately left her job, and by 4:30, she was on the trail to help look for Abby and Libby. The general mindset between the family members who had arrived to find the girls was that they had wandered off the beaten path in an effort to get cooler photos, and had gotten lost or injured. The trail was incredibly old, and the greenery could be tricky to navigate through, so they thought, at most, the girls would be together, slightly injured, but ultimately okay. As the night began to drop dark and the hours went on, the family grew more concerned. They had walked the majority of the trail and hoped, at the very least, their yelling would have been heard by the girls. But all they had encountered was quiet. They convened and realized they needed to get the police involved, and Libby's grandparents went to the police station to inform them of the situation. When the police were alerted, so was the rest of Delphi, and many turned up to help look for the girls. The community came together deep into the dark night to try and find Abby and Libby, calling out into the darkness, hoping that they would get a response. As time went on, the family's hopes began to wane, but they still believed that whatever had happened to the girls had to have been an accident. Maybe they had fallen off the bridge, maybe they were seriously injured, but they had no idea what had actually befallen them. At midnight, the official search was called off until morning for safety reasons, but still, some of the members of the police department continued to search, knowing that if they got injured, at least they were professionals. The police told the families that though the situation seemed dark, the girls were probably hiding in the forest or had simply gotten injured, and there was no reason to think anything different. They told the family that it was unlikely that the girls had been harmed by another party, as there was no evidence of that occurring on or near where the girls had been, and they encouraged the family to stay positive. The next morning at 7 a.m., the entire community, as well as people from other towns and out of state who heard about the disappearance, set out to try and find the girls. A dive team was sent to search the creek below the bridge. Drones were used to survey hard-to-get-to areas, and people were split into groups so every inch of the trail could be properly and carefully surveyed. Unfortunately, it was one of those teams that happened upon Libby's and Abby's remains. The girls' bodies were found around noon, a half-mile east of the bridge. They were found at the north bank of Deer Creek, and though it's unknown as to how, the police stated that their bodies were purposely posed in a manner that was meant to shock those who found them. The police and the FBI, who had been a part of this investigation since the early days, have been incredibly tight-lipped about what happened to Libby and Abby, and their cause of death is still unknown. But, according to court documents that were initially obtained by the Murder Sheet podcast, the girls both lost a significant amount of blood from their wounds, so much so the perpetrator would have gotten blood on themselves or their clothing. It was also found that one item of clothing had been taken from one of the girls, most likely after her death, in order to commemorate the killings. There has been a lot of debate as to why the details about the girls' murder has been kept so private, with some thinking it's a cover-up by the police, and others positing wild conspiracy theories. However, there is still a well-thought-out strategy behind keeping aspects of this crime close to the vest. By keeping the majority of the evidence and details hidden from the public, that ensures that only the people who know what occurred due to the evidence are the killer themselves and the law enforcement agencies, meaning, should someone falsely confess to the crimes for attention, as is often the case when crimes are heavily publicized, the police can easily rule them out. This likewise helps with weeding out potential suspects. At the same time, it means that should they be able to interrogate the killer, they could press him into revealing information that he could have only known. We should also keep in mind that the manner of death, according to the police, was incredibly graphic, and given how old they were at the time, it is likely that their families do not want those details made public. The word of Abby and Libby's tragic demise spread through Delphi and shattered the town. People became scared of their neighbors, and the bridge where the girls had recorded the man walking towards them was fenced off entirely. However, the police were adamant from day one that they wouldn't rest until the person behind what had happened to Abby and Libby was in prison. On February 15th, the video of the man walking towards the girls with his head down was made public, and the public was encouraged to send in tips on who they knew this man to be. Immediately, they were overwhelmed with call-ins and suggestions, all of which they spent a fair amount of time looking into. A week later, they also made a small portion of the audio from that video public. They regarded Libby as being a hero, seeing as she had the presence of mind to record the man, even when she knew she was likely in danger. The police also stated that there was another audio recording, one that has still not been made public, in which the girls talk about a guy following them on the trail, showing how keenly aware the girls were that day. Libby's father, how each of the girls could have left the other, that they could have saved themselves, but refused to let the other one be alone, and they died like soldiers. Many major news sites reported on the case, bringing the case to hundreds of thousands of people and thrusting it into the national spotlight. Groups online railed around the girls, wanting to find out what had happened, and unfortunately, some overzealous true crime fanatics became obsessed with the case to the point of accusing multiple innocent parties and going so far as to state that the victims' families were involved. It's at this point I want to clarify what is helpful and unhelpful in these cases. Posting videos, live streams, theories, or anything disparaging the victims or the families because you are, quote, obsessed with this online mystery because it's entertaining to you is not productive and actually hurts the investigation. Spreading misinformation because you feel like something is off with certain people involved in the investigation is not helpful, and again, is harmful. If you think that you can solve a real-life crime yourself, going online and then spreading false information, and then attacking people in the public sphere, I promise you that is not the way to do it. There are plenty of games, like Hunt a Killer or Clue, that would be better for what you were trying to do here. There are numerous channels that talk incessantly about this case, and although they do it under the guise of wanting to help, they are incredibly harmful and send direct harassment to the victim's family and friends, which is never okay. If you are a part of these communities where you speak ill of the families, spread falsehoods about the case, harass members of the community, and believe yourself to be a private investigator who cares more about this case than the actual families, please consider that this is a form of entertainment to you. This case is very real to the people who lost their family members. If you can't be respectful, at least please be aware that your actions have consequences. In this specific case, the man who found the bodies of Libby and Abby was deeply traumatized by the experience, but then was subjected to online harassment because Facebook groups decided that he took part in the murder. There are countless other cases where this kind of action has occurred, and I want to state clearly here that that is not acceptable. On July 17th, 5 months after the murders, the police released this composite sketch of what they believed Bridge Guy to look like, based on the video, as well as a few eyewitness testimony. This sketch was widely reported on, along with the video and audio from Libby's phone, and stores in Delphi kept images of this man up in their establishments, saying that they would be taken down if and when Libby and Abby's killer was found. But alas, the sketch itself was not the perpetrator. In fact, this sketch, being released at all, would come to be a matter of contention within the investigation, as later on in 2019, the police would state that this person is not a suspect for the killings, and released this sketch of who they believed the actual perpetrator was. The 2019 sketch was made 3 days after the murders, and based on one eyewitness testimony to a person she saw at the bridge tail, but it had been kept private to the investigation the entire time, while the other, apparently false sketch was circulated. What happened to make the first publicized sketch no longer be accurate, and why the police now feel confident that the 2019 sketch is of the man who took the girl's life is unknown. but the detective in charge of the case said this during the press conference where the new sketch was released, goading the killer.
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room. We believe you are hiding in plain sight. For more than 2 years, you never thought we would shift gears to a different investigative strategy, but we have. We likely have interviewed you or someone close to you. We know that this is about power to you, and you want to know what we know. And one day, you will. A question to you. What will those closest to you think of when they find out that you brutally murdered 2 little girls? 2 children. Only a coward would do such a thing. We are confident that you have told someone what you have done. Or at the very least, they know, because of how different you are since the murders. We try so hard to understand how a person could do something like this to two children. I recently watched a movie called The Shack. And there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity. To the murderer, I believe you have just a little bit of a conscience left. And I can assure you that how you left them in that woods is not what they're experiencing today.
It was clear that though publicly it seemed that little had been done to solve the case, it was still being investigated thoroughly, and the police believed they were close to solving the crime. There have been a number of people who have been suspected of killing Abby and Libby over the years, and even more theories about the case have been circulated online, but we will only be covering the publicized leads from the police, as again, we are not in the business of slandering innocent people while LARPing as investigators. One of the first and most notable persons of interest in the murders was Ron Logan. Ron was a resident of Delphi, and the girls' bodies were actually found on his property. Ron was 77 years old when the girls had been killed, but 2 of his ex-girlfriends came forward after the murder to state that he was an extremely violent person who had threatened to kill them multiple times over. One of them stated that should they ever be killed or go missing, it was Ron who probably did it. Outside of his ex-girlfriends, 15 other residents of Delphi submitted credible tips about him and believed he had been behind the crime. The following is an excerpt from the FBI search warrant that was issued for Ron's home after the murders. Logan's physical build is consistent with that of the male suspect videoed by Libby German on the Monon High Bridge Trail. Logan owns farmland and cares for large farm animals. Logan appears to be in good physical condition. Logan has been interviewed several times. His voice is not inconsistent with that of the person in the video. On February 14th, 2017, the same day the girls' bodies were found, at approximately 9:20 a.m., prior to the discovery of their bodies, Logan contacted his cousin. Logan asked him to tell the police that they had come to Logan's home between 2 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. the day before to pick Logan up. Logan further told them to say that he drove him to an aquarium store in Lafayette, Indiana. Logan told them to say they returned home to Logan's home between 5 and 5:30 p.m. On March 6, 2017, during an interview with a lead investigation official, Logan said he was picked up around 3 and taken straight to the aquarium store in Lafayette. These statements were found to be factually false and intentionally designed to deceive investigators. On March 12th, Logan's cousin explained in an interview with an investigator that Logan called him on the morning of February 14th and asked him to provide an alibi for Logan's drive to the aquarium in Lafayette. This phone call was made prior to the discovery of Libby and Abby's deceased bodies. Based on investigators' experience, it is reasonable to believe that the creation of an alibi prior to the discovery of a crime indicates culpability and knowledge of the crime. Later on in the search warrant, it goes on to state that an analysis of Logan's cell phone data revealed a call was placed using Logan's cell phone. He was in or around his property at 2:09 the day of the murder. Initial exam of this analysis indicates Logan's phone was in the Delphi area, in the area of the Monon High Bridge. Later, Logan received a text message on his phone at 7:56 p.m. and 10:56 p.m., and initial exam of this indicates his phone was likely outside of his residence and in proximity to where Libby and Abby's bodies were found. As damning as the evidence seems to be against Logan, he had a seemingly reasonable explanation as to why he asked his cousin to lie on his behalf. Logan had gone to the aquarium store in Lafayette and could provide a receipt for the time he had been there as an alibi. However, he had driven himself there despite not being legally allowed to drive. He didn't want to admit guilt for breaking his probation and be sent to jail, so he asked his cousin to vouch for him, with the hopes that the receipt would be enough evidence for him to remove him from suspicion. Though the cell phone data placed Logan close to the scene of the crime, that could also be explained by the minimal cell phone tower coverage in the area. Unlike in bigger cities where cell phone towers can be used to find exactly where a person was at certain times, because the towers covered such a wide swath of land, Ron could have easily been in his home away from the murder scene at the times where his cell phone was pinged. In 2022, Ron died at the age of 82 years old, and the lead investigators do not believe he took part in the crime. In September of 2017, after the murder of Abby and Libby, Daniel J. Nations was arrested in Woodland Park, Colorado, and charged with threatening strangers on a trail with a hatchet. Given that the cause of death for the girls has never been released, many thought that a man, resembling the sketch, on a trail with a weapon was too similar to be a coincidence. He had a long history of indecent acts, which landed him on the sex offenders registry. In 2007, he was convicted of indecent exposure in South Carolina. Following that, in 2015, he was caught pleasuring himself in a woman's restroom while looking at women through the stall doors, and was once again arrested. He failed to appear in court after, and a warrant was issued for his arrest, which would only occur after he was arrested on suspicion of domestic battery for punching his wife in the nose in front of their children. He lived about 2 hours away from Delphi when the murders occurred, but he would go on to say he never visited and was only made aware of the murders when he was already in jail, and inmates accused him of killing the girls. Nations complied with the investigation, providing his own DNA in the hopes that it would exclude him from suspicion. In an article with the Gazette, Nations states he was just as big of a victim in this crime as Libby and Abby, as he had been falsely accused by the media and press because he hadn't been threatening anyone with a hatchet at Woodland Park. He had been threatening them with his fists, and just so happened to be holding a hatchet. He denied that he resembled the composite sketch of the initial suspect at all, and stated that it was because of the suspicion around this case that his life was in shambles, which is not quite true, as he had been arrested for domestic battery and was a sex offender. Though he has not been cleared of suspicion fully, the investigation into Nations led to a dead end, and the state police superintendent stated that he was not a person that they cared a whole lot about at that point in time. Nations has stated he looks forward to when the killer will be caught for these murders, not because Libby and Abby will get justice, but because it will finally clear his good name. Shortly after, the police stated that another suspect of the murders was a man by the name of Paul Etter. Paul was a 55-year-old man who had a history of violence and assaults. His family's farm was roughly 8 miles away from the Monon High Bridge, and in 2019, Eder kidnapped and sexually assaulted a 26-year-old woman who had pulled into his driveway after getting a flat tire. According to the woman, Eder approached her after she pulled in and asked her if she needed any help. At once, she felt unsafe and declined his offer, choosing to drive a little ways down the road until she was at her friend's house. Unbeknownst to her, he had gotten into his car and followed her. When she got out of her vehicle, he abducted her, took her back to his family's home, and sexually assaulted her. He then decided to take her back to her car. The woman immediately reported what had happened to the police, and Eder went on the run while posting to Facebook about how his mind wasn't right and he had done bad things. He was able to avoid capture for 5 days, stealing cars and hiding out in the town. But on June 27th, the cops caught up with him, and in a standoff with the police, he ended up taking his own life. It was later publicized that the police had been tipped off that Eder could have taken part in the murder of Libby and Abby, given how close his family's farm was to the crime scene and his sexual depravity. However, while the police stated he was a big person of interest who they needed to rule out, it's clear that he is no longer considered such. Thomas Bruce was also considered a suspect of the murders, given his similar appearance to the initially released police sketch of the killer. Bruce had previously been a pastor, but had been charged with the killing of one woman and sexually assaulting others after holding them at gunpoint in the back of a religious supply shop. The attack was done in broad daylight, which was not dissimilar to what had happened with Libby and Abby. Most notably, he had been wearing a flat cap and a blue jacket similar to the one that eyewitnesses said the bridge guy had been wearing. But, much like the others, this lead didn't appear to pan out. However, he remains in prison after being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and multiple other heinous crimes have been linked to him since. Charles Eldridge was also suspected of being the killer after he was arrested in 2019 on charges of child molestation and child solicitation, mostly based on how closely he resembled the composite sketch. That said, later that year, the investigation changed course immediately, and the new sketch was released, which led to Charles being looked over entirely. Other people were named as persons of interest publicly, but it wasn't until 2021 that the police came forward with a new suspect, one who seemed to know a lot about the crime that had not been made public. On December 6th, 2021, the public information officer with the Indiana State Police announced that the man behind the online persona, Anthony_Shots, was the prime suspect in the murders. According to the police, the person behind the profile was one of the last people to interact with Libby before her death, and though it seems the Snapchat logs have not been turned over to the police by the company, the fact that this account spoke to her shortly before the girls were killed, and the profile is not linked to anyone in the Delphi area, is more than suspicious. The account was only active from 2016 to 17, and used photos of a male model to talk to the girls. Moreover, a man behind the account was found to be Keegan Anthony Klein, who resided in Peru, Indiana, which is just a 40-minute drive away from Delphi. Klein had been interviewed by the Indiana State Police just 11 days after the murders for an entirely different crime surrounding the Anthony Shots account. Prior to said interview, the police raided his home and found over 100 photos and videos of underage girls that he had solicited using the Anthony Shots Instagram, Kik, and Snapchat, but he hadn't been connected to the Delphi case until 2020, when the Indiana State Police interviewed him. According to chat logs with other girls from the account, Klein would tell people that he was supposed to meet Libby prior to her death, but she, quote, never showed up, which asks the question, did the girls go to Monon High Bridge with the plan to meet Anthony, thinking he was a cute boy who was supposedly a little bit older than them, only to be attacked by Keegan? The Anthony Shots account and Keegan had gotten onto police radar only 6 days after the murders, when another minor who had been talking to the fake account told Keegan that he should come over the next day to hang out, as her parents wouldn't be home. She was too young and naive to know that she was being preyed on, and believed that, quote, Anthony Shots was someone who wasn't going to take advantage of her. She gave Keegan her address, which he then looked up on multiple of his personal electronic devices, while also Googling her parents' Facebook accounts. The next day, when she got off the bus from school, she saw a man wearing a ski mask looking into her bedroom window. this man physically did not match who she thought Anthony was, and when he realized he had been spotted, he ran off. The girl and her parents called the police, and that is when the Anthony Shots account became known, as she informed them he had gotten her address the day prior. In 5 days' time, the police were able to track the account back down to Klein and his father's home, and raided the domicile, where they found the huge cache of child abuse images. Keegan maintained that he wasn't the man who was stalking outside the girl's home, but him talking to her shortly before, looking up her address, and checking her parents' social media account says otherwise. He was booked in 2020 for his possession of child pornography and is still currently in jail, facing 30 charges surrounding that. Keegan has outright denied that he had anything to do with the murders and says that he doesn't recall talking to Libby at any point. He also stated that he feels as if he is being personally attacked and persecuted by the police over the girl's murder, which is unfair because he is just a pedophile who was caught with over 100 images of children he solicited over social media, and that it's very different. The Murder Sheet podcast was able to get the transcript of an interview that was conducted between the police and Keegan. The entire document is over 100 pages long, and if you would like to read it, I will leave a link to it in the description down below. In the interview, Keegan tried to state that all the images they found weren't technically illegal, as they were from when he was a minor. A direct quote is, like I told them, I can't remember her name. She was just like the, I don't know, something with the child division. All those old videos from when I was underage. The interviewer then states, well, I want to make it clear too that we not only have watched your interviews, but we've personally gone through each device. We've watched the videos, we've seen the pictures, and I can tell you that you were not underage at the time. At various times in the interview, Keegan tries to maintain that he never used fake accounts under fake names to solicit or share porn. But when pressed as to who would have access to his phone and computer to spend countless hours doing as much, he was at a loss. Friends who he stayed with were brought up, as well as his father, but Keegan maintained that they wouldn't have been able to access his phone without him knowing, which he seemingly didn't realize meant that he was the only person who could have received the child porn. As the interrogation went on, the interviewer slowly revealed just how obvious it was that Keegan or his father were the only two men who could be behind the accounts, given that every false account opened led back to their shared home and Keegan's own emails, but he continued to deny responsibility, saying he was definitely a catfish and talked to girls, but didn't go as far as they said he did. It wasn't until page 129 that the investigators brought up Libby and Abby. They asked Keegan why he repeatedly searched Google in the days following the murder about the case, to which Keegan said he was just casually interested in seeing what had happened as a concerned citizen. When asked why he wasn't concerned because Liberty was someone he was talking to, he said he remembered having talked to her because he was talking to so many other young girls at the time. The entire transcript will be available in the description box down below, along with a link to the Murder Sheet podcast, as they've gone over this case in incredible detail. As of now, Keegan has still not been charged with the murders, and there is still a possibility that he or his father had nothing to do with the crime, outside of preying on Liberty online. But according to those closest to this case, it is on the precipice of being solved. If you have interacted with the Anthony Shots account or know any information, please send a tip to the Indiana State Police or the FBI. Links to do so are in the description box down below. Abby and Libby deserve to rest in peace, and their killer needs to be put away. Thank you to Established Titles for the support, and thank you for watching the video. If you have any topics you'd like me to cover, please leave them down in the comments or email us at dreading.official@gmail.com. Have a great day, and remember to stay safe.